For some time now, many people were expecting a recession to hit the United States. We had economists telling us that a recession is coming, with Deutsche Bank putting the odds near 100%. But something weird is happening. The US economy has actually grown in the first two quarters of 2023. Q1 GDP came in at 2%, with the advanced estimate of Q2 hitting 2.4%. And on the surface, this looks like a resilient economy. Hey, maybe Joe Biden was right and things are still booming. But there's something insidious about this outlook that we need to talk about. Back in 2022, America entered a technical recession, which is defined by two consecutive quarters of negative GDP growth. And we know the White House redefined the term and effectively cancelled recession from history, but it was still a recession nonetheless because the economy contracted. But now something funny is happening. The economy is growing, and the US consumer, at least on paper, looks to be still very strong. The unemployment rate is still at a historic low of 3.5%, even though the Federal Reserve has raised interest rates all the way to 5.5%. So, if people have jobs, they have money, and if they have money, they can spend and stimulate the economy. But is that really the truth? A CNBC survey found that 92% of all Americans are pulling back spending. So obviously something has got to give. And the main reason why consumption is still so high is because of government deficit spending. And I want us to understand how serious this really is. In 2022, the Biden administration spent $6.27 trillion dollars, and this accounted for 25% of GDP. And this means out of $10 in GDP, at least 250 comes from the US government itself. But it is likely much higher. So dodging a recession suddenly becomes a math equation. If the US consumer isn't spending money, Biden himself can step in and throw money at the problem. I think this is the big blind spot that a lot of us didn't see coming. We thought that monetary policy by the Federal Reserve would be enough to crush demand and destroy GDP. After all, power hiked from 0 to over 5% in 18 months, but we forgot about fiscal policy. The US government can kick the can down the road by borrowing more money for deficit spending. They are trading a recession for perpetual inflation. And let's take a look at the federal budget spending because it really reveals a lot about why the US economy is still afloat today. In 2022, the government brought in around $5 trillion in revenue and spent almost $6.5 trillion. So the deficit is somewhere around $1.5 trillion or so. And looking through the list, we can see it encompasses a whole host of categories that affect the real economy. Let's take $1.2 trillion of social security for example. Now this is money given to retirees that are spent in the real economy. It's money spent on food and shelter, which directly contributes to the GDP. And the same goes for other types of spending such as defense and Medicare. It puts money in the pockets of people and corporations, allowing them to consume more. So if Biden wants to keep the US economy afloat, all he has to do is to borrow more and spend more. I know it is insane. And this is where we need to dig into the numbers because it is truly horrifying. Congress is literally spending its way out of recession. And so far this fiscal year, federal spending for the first 10 months hit $5.3 trillion. And this is an increase of $471 billion compared to the previous year. And we still have 2 more months to go. Almost $500 billion more have been flowing to the US economy and it's just circulating around. It is demand being injected directly from the US government. But this spending isn't over yet, guys. Remember all those trillions of dollars being borrowed by Janet Yellen? The Q2 borrowing of $1 trillion from July to September, that amount was up from the original $730 billion. Then we also have Yellen borrowing an additional $852 billion from October to December 2023. She isn't issuing all those treasuries for fun. Biden is raising money to spend his way out of a recession. And this next chart will show you exactly why. The federal government is experiencing a massive budget gap. They are bringing in less revenue than what they are spending. In the first 9 months of the fiscal year, from October to June, Biden brought in $3.4 trillion, but total spending was $4.8 trillion. And this means the deficit is $1.4 trillion with 3 more months to go. This budget gap is 170% bigger than in the previous year. So America is borrowing more to run the country. And what we are seeing is an extreme borrowing problem coupled with deficit spending that is propping up the economy. Now, guys, our friends in America who are struggling to make ends meet, but the economy is still showing resilience. There's this big disconnect, but at least now we know why. And if we zoom out on the global economy, we can see the whole world is starting to slow down. We have Europe crashing into a recession. Then we have China also sliding into deflation. Consumer prices have declined since 2020. And this tells us that the global consumer demand is starting to dry up as well. Countries are not importing as much as they used to. We can confirm this from a Bloomberg report that shows the US trade gap widening to the largest in 6 months as exports slump. The shortfall in goods and services grew by 23% a month earlier to 74.6 billion. If America's exports are declining by the most since the lockdowns, this shows foreign consumer demand is falling. It is domestic spending from the government itself that is keeping the economy alive. It's not that the US consumer is resilient, it's the deficit spending that is truly resilient. And as long as Congress keeps borrowing money, they can keep kicking the can down the road and dodge a recession. Now, this is where things get really interesting because it gives us a timeline for how long this melt up can last. The S&P 500 has been on an epic bull run up almost 17% year to date. It's like we are back in a bull market and this could last for longer, guys. We mustn't underestimate the power of deficit spending because there's literally no limit to how much the US government can borrow. And I want us to take a time machine back to June when Congress passed the debt ceiling bill. And let's focus on two parts of the bill. This is why Biden can postpone a recession for the next 12 to 18 months. As part of the bill, the debt limit will be suspended until January 2025. That means the US government can borrow an unlimited amount of money during that period. Whether it's $1 trillion or $5 trillion, they can borrow and spend as much as they want. Now, the second part of the bill deals with caps and spending cuts. But pay attention to this. The bill would limit all discretionary spending to just a 1% growth in 2025. And this gives Biden an incentive to ramp up spending now to set a higher bar for 2025. And it's no surprise why we see Janet Yellen selling tons of US treasuries today as if they're expired goods. Congress is spending as much as they can before 2025, and that alone could postpone the recession all the way until then. We must look at the incentives. Does it benefit the Biden administration to kick the can down the road? After all, 2024 is an election year. President Biden is running on the economy using Bidenomics, right? Which I finally figured out what it meant. It is a term for endless deficit spending. And in 2024, he's going to face the toughest election fight of his life, whether it's Donald Trump, Vivek Ramaswamy, or RFK Jr. Biden needs to keep the economy on life support to stand a chance of re-election. So he's going to keep spending and spending until 2025. Now, we know investing our money is important, but the best investment is monetizing a skill or business idea that we have, right? And this is where you truly have unlimited upside while building the lifestyle that you truly want. But are you prepared for invoices, expenses, payments, and taxes? Now, these are the things that are important for your business, but a real pain to attend to. Thankfully, with Osome, you can focus on building your business and leave the rest to them. Your financial director is just one click away. Their accountants are small business specialists who care about helping you grow. Your dedicated accountant goes beyond just the bookkeeping and compliance tick boxes. They proactively help founders with the financial information they need to succeed. So get on board with Osome and grow your business better today. Click in the link in the description below to get free incorporation plus 16% off any of their services when you sign up for a package today. So welcome to Martian economics. Everything doesn't make sense anymore. We are not in a free market economy. We all thought it would be the Federal Reserve controlling the levers of the economy through monetary policy, right? Power can use interest rates and QE to stimulate the economy. But fiscal policy from the government is just as powerful. You are borrowing money from the world and injecting it directly into the US economy. So the higher rates and all the bond selling we see from the Federal Reserve isn't really to crush inflation. It's probably just to ensure it doesn't get worse from deficit spending. The Federal Reserve will likely keep rates high well into 2024 to counter government spending. But it is that very spending that is keeping the economy afloat. And if we approach our thinking from that perspective, it kind of makes sense that a recession could actually be postponed for a while longer. It could happen in 2024 or even in 2025 after the elections. The CPI inflation has rebounded to 3.2%, but core inflation is still sticky at 4.7%. So higher prices are here to stay. Don't expect the Fed to lower rates anytime soon. And with Janet Yellen borrowing a ton of money, we can expect bond yields to stay high. Now, I'm sure you're wondering how long can Biden really kick the can down the road? Will we ever get a recession? And obviously, this state of affairs can't continue forever. Putting up the interest payments on the national debt, we can see this insane spike since 2022. The US government is paying almost $1 trillion a year annually just to service the interest payments. That's what happens when you borrow a ton of money at higher interest rates. There's also a physical limit to how much money you can borrow. There are estimates that the net interest cost will account for 40% of revenues by 2053, but it is much likely to hit that number earlier. So the borrowing will end sooner or later. If interest cost hits 50% or even 60% of federal revenues, this will accelerate the path towards a default. But in the short term, unfortunately, the US government can keep borrowing a ton of money without any visible effects. They can borrow more money to service the interest payments, and they can definitely keep this up until 2025. And in order for a recession to hit, I believe it will have to involve a big triggering event. A black swan event has to happen. Maybe it's a banking crisis that will trigger the collapse, or maybe it'll be commercial real estate that will start the recession. We won't know for sure, but until then, we might keep getting a melt up. So what does this mean? Basically, the markets could keep heading up. The S&P could challenge all-time highs and even exceed them. The big banks like JP Morgan are forecasting a record S&P 500. Almost half of their clients expect a new all-time high by end of the year. Goldman Sachs has given 20% odds for a recession in 2024, which is wildly bullish. This is where we must be careful. Even though indicators like the yield curve are screaming red, there could still be a melt up because people are still chasing returns. The Conference Board just released their leading economic indicator, which is signaling an economic recession ahead. There's that huge drop in economic activity that is reaching the 2020 lockdown levels, but real GDP is still up. Look at the grey line. And let's zoom back 15 years. After the leading economic indicators went negative, it still took GDP at least 18 months to crash below 0% as well. There's this lag effect that we aren't really considering. Plus now we have literally unlimited deficit spending all the way until 2025. That's why even today I don't short the markets. I've been averaging into stocks ever since it was around 3700, 3800 or so, because we just don't know how long this game will last. The S&P could very well hit 5,000 points before a crash happens. And what if it only falls 10% or 20% before the Fed steps in and saves the day? And there's really so much uncertainty today that we just don't know. But here's the crazy part. You now have more options than before. Money markets are now yielding well above 5%, and these are interest rates that people would die for a few years ago. You're actually getting a real yield today. I'm still long the markets because I have no idea how long this shell game can continue. But I also have around 40% of my allocation stashed away in cash that's yielding 5.5%. So if a crash happens like I still believe it will, I have dry powder to pump back into the markets. However, if stocks keep going higher, I'll be further in the green as well. The big risk, ironically, is to the upside. So I believe it's smarter to prepare for both scenarios. A scenario where Biden keeps spending to keep the zombie economy afloat, and another where the market collapses because there are no certainties today. But let me know what you think. How long can this deficit spending last? Can they postpone the recession all the way until 2025? Let me know in the comments below. Stay safe, be sure to smash the like button and subscribe as we navigate through these crazy times.